G'day guys, Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and I've just come back from the VTC, Victorian Team Championships, where my team placed second overall, and I played an undefeated 5 rounds, running my Emperor's Children from the old, technically current Chaos Space Marines book. And this week I'm going into my last hurrah. It's going to be the Geelong Town Open. It's a standard sort of 5-game singles event with a few twists involved. And in that event, they're using the Nackman mission pack, so the old mission pack, and they're allowing the old Chaos Space Marine book. So it's going to be a real last hurrah for those missions, a last hurrah for the Chaos Space Marine Codex, and it's got some twists involved to just spice things up a bit and make it a little bit of fun. So a really good send-off for the 8th edition, so to speak, Chaos Space Marine playstyle. So basically what I want to do today is go through the event itself and what's different about it, what's unique in the event, and how these twists are going to come into play. If you want to know what list I'm running, it's very, very similar to the list that I've done in my previous videos. So I'll chuck a link to those in the description below. But yeah, if you want to know about the list, if you want to know about the playstyle, the tactics, the strategies, the masterclass on the Master of Execution, all of that sort of stuff is available on my other videos. I didn't really see much value in going over it again, simply because this is, as I said, going to be a last hurrah for that codex. So there's not much point talking about tactics and strategies for that codex when it's already been covered and it's not going to be relevant come next week. So that's where we're at with that. So I'm going to just jump straight into reviewing the player pack and talking about the different twists and those sorts of things that we're going to expect at the event. Alrighty guys, so the Geelong Town Open is going to follow a somewhat traditional event format where there's going to be 5 rounds. I believe they got 60 players, so it will be a GT. It's going to be ITC ranked, all of that good shit. However, there's a few things that they're doing differently than the standard event, so I'll just outline them first, and then we'll get into the missions and the twists and those sorts of things later in the video. So the first thing that they're doing is they're introducing soft scores. Now, for those of you who've been following my channel for a while will know how I feel about soft scores. If you want to, I've done a really detailed explanation of what I think they do to the game and why I feel the way I feel on soft scores in a previous episode on my Bloody Oath podcast. I'll chuck a link to the description below if you want to really deep dive it. But suffice to say, I'm not a big fan of soft scores. However, I think that the Geelong Town Open has done a relatively modest way of doing their soft scores, so it's not that big of a deal. And basically what soft scores are, for those of you who are not familiar, is where basically instead of just going off your battle points and having a podium and your first, second, thirds, and it's all good, they instead add paint scores to your overall score and sportsmanship scores often to your overall score, and then that determines who is the overall winner. So basically, in order to win the event, you need to not only play well and actually play the game good, but you also need to be able to paint good. So Geelong Town Open are doing that as well. And basically, they have a paint score set of criteria that you need to meet in order to maximize your paint score and therefore maximize your potential to win the event overall. Now, it is worth saying that I have clarified with the TO that the overall will not be considered as the overall in the purposes of ITC placings and scores and rankings. So this is a sort of a separate competition happening within the event. So you'll still go based off battle, still be run like a standard event for the purposes of ITC. And for those that want to just chase those battle points, they can. However, if you want to win the prize for the event, which goes to the overall winner, you need to engage in all aspects of the hobby. So that paint rubric is pretty simple, pretty standard. So I'll pull it up on the screen now. So if the entire force is battle ready, you get 15 points. And you should be doing that anyway, because otherwise you lose your 10 points per round for battle ready. But then does the army display a cohesive scheme? And this is a 0 to 5, so it's a sliding scale. And basically the way that this will work is as long as all your basing and all your paint schemes are all the same, it's all painted the same legion, that sort of stuff, you get the 5 points. But the further you deviate from that, the fewer points you'll get. Then do you have any advanced shading, highlighting, or painting techniques? Things like freehand, that sort of stuff is all included there. Then do you have any advanced basing? Tufts, snow, water effects, that sort of thing will get you between 0 and 5 points, depending on how much you do. Then are there any conversions or model customization, freehand, stencils, weathering, or other effects, squad marking / unit differentiation, and other painting / modeling not listed above. So things like LED, display boards, etc. But yeah, so that's the way that they're doing their paint score. Apparently they're getting in some paint judges that are previous Golden Demon winners, so you know that they're going to have a very high standard, they're going to have a very high bar, and in order to achieve those points, it's going to be quite difficult. But that's one of the ways that they're going to contribute to your overall score. All right, the next part of the soft scores where it contributes to your overall score are players' choice votes. So basically the way that this will work is at the end of the event, or they'll probably do it at lunchtime, give people an opportunity to set up their armies for a display. And you can basically go around and vote for people and give them points. And basically each player gets to give out 3 votes. The first vote goes 5 points, the second vote goes 3 points, and the final vote goes 1 point. And you can use that to essentially reward players that you feel have put in the effort. One of my concerns with this is that often it ends up being a buddy club. I've ran TOs where I've had this and then done the data analysis myself and found that almost everybody voted for each other. So like player A voted for player B, but player B voted for player A. And player C voted for player D, and player D voted for player C. So it looks like more or less this ends up with everybody who brought their mates to the event is at an advantage because their mates are going to vote for them. And those people who might not have brought any friends to the event, or might for whatever reason, those people are at a disadvantage, which is one of the drawbacks to this system. However, it does incentivize people to put in that little bit more extra effort to hopefully secure some of those points. So take it or leave it. I'm not a huge fan, but I respect their decision to implement it at this event. For prizes and overall, they've basically got an overall, which is going to be a highest score combining all of these soft scores and their battle score. Then they're going to have a first, second, and third best general, which will be your traditional podium. And then on top of that, they're also giving out awards for best presented and player's choice. So there's a few different awards there. And then the other one that they've got, which is called the GTO Special, which is something I think is really cool. And that is that the second last place gets an award. And the reason that they're doing the second last is because it's easy to just tank all your games, lose everything, and come last. But to come second last means you're not even the best at being the worst. That's a hard spot to be in. So I think it's cool that they're awarding that. And that's an interesting take on the old wooden spoon that we see at lots of events. The next thing that they're doing with their scoring, which is quite interesting, is for the podium, the best general, first, second, and third, they're going to be using the standard ITC model, standard BCP scoring system. However, for their best overall, they've introduced a 300-point win, a 200-point draw, and a 100-point loss with no victory points included in that. And then they're going to layer the presentation and the player's choice votes on top of that to determine who's the best overall. So basically you got 5 games. So if you win all 5 of them, you're going to start straight away with 1,500. And then there's a number of points available for presentation and a number of points available for player's choice votes. Basically, that's how they're going to be determining who wins overall. And the overall prize is actually going to be a chain axe gore child, similar to the one behind me, but of higher quality. So I'm really hoping that I can win that, but we'll see how we go. And that's all going to come down to these missions and the twists, which I'm going to get into now. All right, so for the missions, they've gone with the standards straight out of the chapter approved battle ready missions, and they're not doing anything to that. So you got your standard array of secondaries to choose from. You got your standard way of scoring primary. There's nothing too funky that going on there. However, what they've done to try to spice things up a bit is they've overlaid a set of twists on top of that. And basically the way this is going to work is that there's going to be 2 twists drawn out of essentially out of a hat at the start of each round. The first twist is going to apply to the first half of all of the tables, and the second is going to apply to the second half of all of the tables. So at a 60-player event, there's going to be 30 tables. So tables 1 to 15 are going to play with this twist, and tables 16 to 30 are going to play with the other twist. And basically that twist is in play for the entirety of that round. At the end of the round, that twist is discarded and they draw 2 new twists for the following round. So that's the way that the twists are going to work, and then it'll depend on which table you're on as to which twist will impact your game. So that's an interesting way of doing the twists, but it's not my favorite method. We ran an event a few years back called the 40K Draft, where what we did is we wanted to do something similar. We wanted to spice things up with some twists to just create a bit more of a relaxed, fun kind of event. And what we did is we basically gave players a sheet with 3 different deployments, 3 different twists, and 3 different objectives on it. And then they alternated eliminating one at a time until they were left with just 1 deployment, 1 twist, and 1 objective. And then those 3 were in play. And that actually gave players a little bit of agency, which allowed them to avoid the twists that particularly hurt their army, or try to leverage it in such a way that they can put in play a twist that particularly hurts their opponent. So it was a really fun sort of mini game before the game. I had wished that Geelong Town Open adopted a system more like that. However, they've gone for you essentially get a 50-50 on each one of these twists on whether or not it's going to impact you. And it all comes down to where you are on the tables. So basically, I'm going to run through the twists now, and I'll give a really brief outline of what I think these twists are going to do to the game after each one. All right, so the first twist is called Invigorated, and basically it gives you +1 move and +1 to advance in charge rolls for both you and your opponent army-wide. Now, this one's cool. I don't think this is particularly game-breaking because it's not going to take any units that were subpar and make them god tier, and it's not going to take any god tier units and invalidate them. So I don't think this is going to break the game. I don't think this is any much of a problem for anyone. It's just a cool little fun twist that basically just means everything's going to be faster, everything's going to be advancing more, and everything's going to be charging a little bit further. I think this one's fine. It's fun. It's interesting. Nothing much more to say. All right, the next one is called Exhausted. And basically all this one does is subtract 1 from the strength characteristic of every model on the board. This one's particularly bad for combat-oriented armies because obviously a Tau gun line, they don't give a fuck what their strength characteristic is. However, those combat lists that need to go in and do damage, they're at a pretty significant disadvantage here, particularly if they're going into an opponent that is high toughness. Because, if you're toughness 4 and they're toughness 6 and you're winning them on 5s, but now you're at neg1 strength and so are they don't really care that they're neg1 strength, but now you're wounding them on 6s. So this can be, depending on how you've constructed your list, this can be a pretty significant debuff to combat specifically. However, I don't think it's that big of a deal because these days most people have ways of getting access to rerolls or access to +1 to wound or those sorts of things. So I don't think this is going to particularly break any lists, but it is a bit of a kick in the dick to combat armies. All right, twist number 3 is Inimical Atmosphere. And this one is easily the worst for me particularly, but I think this is also one of the ones that has the biggest impact on the way that the game is going to play. And basically what this one does is it says you cannot advance ever, and you can only ever declare a charge against a target if that target is within 7 inches. Now, obviously for me, that's a disaster, right? Because I come in from deep strike and try to charge from 9 inches away. So not being able to declare those charges pretty much renders my entire army redundant, which is obviously a disaster for me. However, there's also a lot of armies that rely on things like advance and charge to get up the table and do their work. And this obviously hurts them as well because you can't advance. Or, you might be trying to kite somebody who's a really fast unit and you're trying to stay outside of their charge range. Well, now you can't advance, but at the same time, it hurts their charge range because they can't declare if they're further than 7 from you. So it's a double whammy on any type of deep striking combat army or any type of fast advance and charge kind of combat army. So in order to get a turn 1 charge, for example, normally you would need to get past that halfway mark. And then, because you couldn't declare on things that are outside of 12, so as long as you can move more than 12, you could theoretically get a turn 1 charge if your opponent frontlined. Whereas now, you would have to move like 15 inches so that they end within 7 of you, or whatever it is. It's even more than that. So it's a real nerf to anything that's going for turn 1 charges, anything that's going for deep strike charges, even armies that rely on advance and shoot. The ability to get those angles is really nerfed. This one is a really big pivot in the way that the game is played. And for that reason, I don't think it's a good twist, because it doesn't necessarily add any more excitement or any more fun to the game. It actually subtracts. Whereas the ones where it's like, oh, you get +1 attack, or you get +1 movement, like they're fun because it's giving people something. This is robbing certain people of something whilst not impacting others. Like Tau, don't care. Guard gunlines, don't care. Custodies don't really care. Like there's tons of really high tier factions that don't care about this one, but there are certain factions that need to be able to do this stuff to function, and it just kicks them while they're down. So I'm not a big fan of this twist, and fingers crossed, because there's a 50-50 chance of getting each twist, fingers crossed I can dodge this one. If I do get it, I'm going to have to try and play a more cagey kind of game where I deep strike into cover and then go for the charges in the following subsequent turns, which is going to really slow down the pace of the game. It's going to make things like the Long War and Stranglehold much harder to get, because I'm not going to be able to drop and charge people off of objectives. So, we'll see how it goes, but I'm not a huge fan of this one. All right, the next one is System Interference, where basically all aura ranges are reduced to 2 inches. Again, this one's not that big of a deal, I feel, because all it does is force people to tighten up a little bit. And most people, if you're able to get within 6 inches of a character for his aura, you're probably going to be able to get within 2 inches anyway. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. It'll slightly change some armies, but it's not going to be the end of the world for anyone. Again, though, it does feel like it's one of those things where they're taking away for no real reason. I much prefer the sorts of twists where both players gain access to something epic. If you're going to do twists at all, that's the best way to do it, I feel. Whereas if you're doing it where you're taking away, that just leaves people that feels bad. All right, the next twist is a nice simple one called Rage, where basically all models on the table gain +1 attack. This is going to be really huge. This is a good one in the way that it gives people things, but it's also really good on units that have a low volume of high quality attacks, which is the opposite of what my list is, but I don't mind, that's fine. But for those lists where you've got, somebody with a Thunderhammer and 3 attacks, well, that Thunderhammer getting 4 attacks is huge. Whereas if you take like a standard Marine and give him +1 attack, who cares? That being said, this is one of those ones where Tau are going to hate it. And certain factions that benefited from some of the earlier twists, they're going to hate this twist, because basically they get no benefit out of getting extra attacks, and your opponent getting extra attacks increases the probability that they're going to actually kill and damage the things that they do get charges on. So that's really interesting, and I think this one's fine, and I think it restores a little bit of the balance from some of the previous twists, which were, in my opinion, quite punitive. All right, the next one is another one that's going to affect those shooting armies. It's called Cyclone, and basically you subtract 1 from the strength characteristic of attacks that originate from further than 18 inches from the target. So basically, those long-ranged armies, they get hurt by this one. That being said, these days with the smaller table size and the increased speed on the units, it's pretty easy to get within 18 inches of your target. It just means that in those situations where you are going for those long-range shots, your guns are going to be firing at -1 strength, which is, again, that's something that the gun lines like your Tau and your Guard, they're going to hate, because they want to just be bombarding you from range. But close-range shooting armies aren't going to care, and combat armies are not going to care. So this one's probably fine. That being said, again, I don't like ones where it is specifically punitive for a small portion of the player field, and the rest of the player field doesn't care. That, I'm not a huge fan of those twists. So even though this one doesn't affect me, I still think it's probably not the ideal way to do twists, to have things like this, because it's going to piss off some people. And then because the majority of people don't care, there won't be a massive amount of sympathy for those people. And it kind of just, I don't know, it leaves people with a sour taste in their mouth. All right, the next twist is called Hatred, where you basically get to re-roll 1s to hit against the closest target. This is obviously really good for close combat armies because they're engaged with the unit. That's the closest unit. That's who they want to be attacking anyway. And therefore, basically all combat armies just got reroll ones to hit. But shooting armies do get some value out of this as well, provided that they're targeting the closest unit. So this one's probably good in the way that it's giving and it's not taking away. So that makes people feel good. And it's not exclusively for combat armies. Both players gain benefit from this, provided that they're doing, the targeting the closest thing. So this one's fine. It's also quite subtle, rerolling ones to hit. It's like, yeah, okay, that's not going to break the game. That's not going to take any garbage units and make them busted. And it's not going to take any busted units and break them and fuck them. So I think this is a good twist, and I would have liked to have seen more in the vein of this. All right, this next one, Blackout, is also a very big change to the way that the game is played, where basically all psychic powers and shooting attacks are limited to a range of 18 inches. So this means that those armies that want to be shooting you and staying outside of your charge range are going to really struggle, because 18 inches is the standard infantry charge range, right? Move 6, charge 12. So your potential threat range is 18, and this forces the gun line to come into 18. So this one really fucks gun lines. It really fucks any list that doesn't want to do its damage either close range or in combat. So it's really unfortunate. And again, this one's similar to the last one in the way that the last one was primarily beneficial to combat armies and didn't really impact shooting armies that are targeting the closest thing, which is generally going to be within 18. This one is hugely beneficial to combat armies and doesn't really negatively impact close-ranged shooting armies. The difference is this one is a disaster for long range, whereas the previous one, which was just reroll ones against the closest, it wasn't a disaster for long range. They just didn't gain the thing, whereas this one takes away from them. I would have liked to have seen this, like, maybe if you're from outside of that 18 inches, you get a -1 to hit modifier, or maybe you can't re-roll things from that distance or something like that. But to flat out just say, if you're outside of 18, suck a dick, you're not shooting, that is a bad game design, in my opinion. And that's going to really upset some people who wanted to bring their Dakar. They've spent points on their list for las cannons, and now all of a sudden they have no use in that matchup. And knowing that it's only a 50-50 chance that they're going to get that matchup makes it feel even worse, because it means that they might actually try to gamble for it and go, you know what, I'm going to bring my range things anyway, because there's only a 50-50 chance that one of my games is going to have that twist. But you just know that you're going to get it in that game where it's going to be a hard matchup based on lists anyway, and you really needed those las cannons to be able to do the damage, and that gets stripped away from you. That being said, this one, you can play around it by just playing more aggressive with your movement and getting within that 18. So it doesn't necessarily stop you from being able to shoot. What it realistically does is stop you from being able to hold your own backfield and shoot. So it's a bad twist in my opinion, but I think if people play it smart, it should be fine. All right, this twist is called Gales, and it's basically the inverse of the first one, where this one subtracts 1 from your move and subtracts 1 from advance and charge rolls. Now this one, again, is a penalty that hurts certain armies and doesn't really impact others, so I'm not a huge fan. However, it's not that big of a penalty. Like, subtracting 1 from your movement characteristic isn't that big of a deal. And subtracting 1 from advance and charge rolls, again, it's not going to be a game breaker for most lists. That being said, if you're one of those advance and charge style armies, you're going to get layered by your move gets negged by 1, then your advance gets negged by 1, then your charge gets negged by 1. So if you're planning on advancing and charging, this is actually a -3 to that result, which is pretty significant. And then if you end up having to go through cover or something like that, you could be a -5. So this one's a bit of a kick in the dick to that very specific playstyle, but by and large, I don't think this is that big of a deal, and I think most armies are going to be able to go, yeah, cool, whatever, I don't care. So not that big of a deal, but still not ideal in the way that it is a penalty. The twists should never be penalties. All right, and then the last twist for the event is called Warp Rift, where basically all models in the table gain +1 toughness. Now this one is very interesting. So it's giving something, which is something that I like. I like it when the twists are something positive that both players get to engage with. However, adding 1 to the toughness of some models becomes a real big problem. It's not quite the same as the inverse when they were adding 1 strength. Because if you add +1 toughness, now you're making durable, like previous units that used to be durable become hyper durable, you know, and that can be a bit of a problem. A toughness 8 rhinos, for example. So for 85 points, you get a toughness 8 rhino. That's so fucking annoying. And one of the weaknesses to the rhino is that they're relatively easy to pop. But if you make it toughness 8, you now can't pop it. And so, for example, the +1 strength doesn't change that interaction, because if you're a Space Marine with your strength 4 or strength 5, you're going to be going into the rhino and you're still winning on 5s. But if you can make that rhino now toughness 8, well, now that Marine with his strength 4 bolter is winning on 6s. So it just means that things like rhinos, cheap, medium toughness vehicles, are going to become so much harder to shift and therefore so much more annoying in what they can do via screening you out, via wrapping things and engaging with things. Like they can go, oh, that's a unit that's going to shoot me. I'm just going to charge my rhino into it. And that unit's not going to kill the rhino because it's toughness fucking 8. And now that unit can't shoot all game, because if they fall back, I'm just going to charge them again and I'm just going to keep doing that. So that's a really interesting twist. And I think that one's going to have a slightly bigger impact than people might be predicting based off reading it. They probably read it and go, oh, +1 toughness. Yeah, that's fine. But I think there's key units in the game that's going to actually really break. And so we'll see how we go. Then again, ultimately, it's adding something to the game, not subtracting. So I think that's relatively fine. And I think it should be interesting. Alrighty, guys. So that more or less sums up my sort of first thoughts, reading through the player pack for the Geelong Town Open, talking about the mission pack, the twists, those sorts of things. So that's this weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'll talk to you guys after the event and make sure that I share with you my results and share with you how the event went, whether or not any of these twists actually were as big of a problem or as big of a boost as I expected. Let's see whether or not I'm right or wrong on those. Let's see whether or not I'm right or wrong on the soft scores and whether or not there's any problems arise from that. And this will be my last video on the current Emperor's Children list that I'm running, the current mission pack, all of those sorts of things. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been following the channel, because I've been having a lot of success, and a lot of it comes from feedback that you guys have. When I talk to you guys and I engage with the community, that's one of the ways that I'm able to improve my lists and improve my play style and improve my skills, by the constant communication with you. So keep that up. It's definitely appreciated, and I'll talk to you soon. Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented Neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not 1, not 2, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, People who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.